So my parents spoke with me in Hebrew when I was since I was born. But Panama, it's a Spanish speaking country, and my school is an English speaking school. So that's how
Okay.
I
So,
get
so did you?
confused. I get confused a lot. Like I
Okay, that's
have,
exactly what I was gonna ask.
yeah. In my house, we can't complete a single sentence in one language. It got really
Welcome back, everybody, to another one of our convos. Today, joining us is another very special guest, Yael Danon. I believe I got that right.
you did.
Okay, cool.
Thank
Um,
you.
yeah, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here, even if it's on Zoom.
Yeah, it's unfortunately kind of become you know, the way of the world now.
Yeah, it did. Yesterday I was in my first Zoom with a friend since 2020. So it was so funny. I couldn't stop laughing.
Since 2020.
Yeah, since
Crazy.
2020.
All right. Well, obviously we're here because you have some new music that came out, new album. Got a lot of things going on with your career and otherwise, and we're gonna kind of discuss all that. But before we get into that, we always want to ask kind of about your background, kind of give people a little insight into who you are as a person, as an artist. So, kind of like, can you speak to kind of like your background, your upbringing, and how you kind of got into music?
Yeah, so I actually started singing when I was 8 years old. I remember there was this school talent show, and I was snooping through my mom's phone, and I saw that someone sent in oh, there's auditions, and I was like, Mom, I think I want to audition just because I wanted to do some sort of competition. And I was like, that same day, I decided I was gonna sing, and I practiced for 6 hours with a house computer, and I auditioned with Let It Go from Frozen. And
Okay.
yeah, I got in, and it was my first it was quite a big show for a school thing. And I remember that as soon as I got in, I was so nervous, but as soon as I was on stage, I was like, wow, I love this feeling. And after that show, I was like, I want to keep singing. I want to get a coach and start doing this. And I started taking vocal lessons since I was 8 years old. And I had this purple journal diary where I would write stupid songs when I was very young. And I went to my music teacher and I was like, hey, I want to sing. And that's how he introduced me to some festivals in Panama, and I started performing when I was 9 in something called Luna Llena de Tambores, which is a big drum circle. And I remember my first show, there were 4,000 people, and he was like, you can if you don't want to do it, it's okay. And I was like, I'm gonna do it. And that's how I started performing. I started in musical theater when I was 10 years old, and I did 4 productions here in Panama. And then things actually started my life sort of changed when I was 13, because I went to visit my family in the summer of 2018, and my dad found out through his friend auditions for Israel's Got Talent. And he asked me oh yeah, there's audition, do you want to do it? And I was like, of course I want to do it, this is crazy. And we called them, and they said they had one last audition. So it was like 2 days after the call, and I had to sing in front of the producers 7 songs. I prepared 3, and they were like, oh, can you do this, can you do this? And then they said that they wanted me in the show, so I had to come back to Israel that year twice. And then in January 2019, I won the show. So that was the moment where I realized I want to start releasing my own music. I love I love the performing, I love doing the covers, but it's time for me to release what I write too. So that's how it kind of started. And then I started doing more performances here in Panama, opening concerts and other festivals. So that was pretty much how it all started.
Okay. So you have like a wide spanning kind of career already because singing in Israel and Panama and kind of going back to like you were born in Panama, born and raised in Panama, correct?
Yes, I still live here for now, right
Okay.
now.
And then you ended up going to Israel just to visit family, to
Exactly. It was pretty much like that was the moment where I was like, is this really a coincidence? Like it was very exciting, the whole journey.
okay. And did you have to sing in Hebrew or English, or did it really matter?
So it like for the show, it didn't really matter. I do sing mostly in English, like my songs, and I write in English. But I also like in the show, they did ask me to sing like songs in Spanish and Hebrew. So it's pretty fun because I also got to sort of explore um the three languages in the show. And today, like sort of like I think it's so interesting how also in my music it was so important for me to at least have a few elements of my cultural
Hmm.
background.
So like you started at 8. So how did you like first kind of get into music? Was your household just a very musical place? Was it kind of where you got your influences, and what kind of made you want to go down this road?
Well, I remember that I used to watch a lot of like TV shows that are music schools and sort of like a lot of YouTube singing everything. And I remember my mom used like we used to listen a lot to Aretha Franklin. Like she's our
It's a good one.
icon. I remember that in the car we would always sing Aretha and Ray Charles, and my dad used to listen a lot to rap also, and also music in Hebrew. So it was very different genres. Like my mom and my dad listened to had very different music tastes. But it was sort of like I would listen to music a lot, even because I started off as like I started in ballet. So there was also when I was like 3 years old, I started first like dancing before I started singing. And it was also a lot of music and like rhythm and everything. And it's sort of like even if like I still dance, but I don't take it like competitively as I used to. So all of that like music that I grew up with sort of shaped my music style nowadays.
Yeah. So who would you say, like, obviously Aretha's big influence? Who would you say like some of the other artists that have been a big influence on like you and your music and how you kind of create?
So when I was younger, I also a big influence was Adele. For me, it was all about like the big vocal, um, like the control and everything. And today, I actually listen to every genre. I have a month for every like I choose a month and I obsess with a playlist, and that's it. So I think I listen a lot to at when Olivia Rodrigo released her album, I used to stream a lot. Today I listen a lot to Lofi or Loive, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Um, I also took some influences from like, wait, can you hear me or am I
Yeah. Yeah.
frozen?
Yeah.
Perfect. And pretty much I at some point I listened a lot to Ariana. So it pretty much changes
Mm,
throughout every month. I feel like I like to listen to really different genres, including Rosalia is one of my biggest influences, even though it's not like for me, it's like how she took her background, the flamenco, and she made it her own like pop reggaeton thing. It's I think is fascinating.
yeah. I mean, especially nowadays with a lot of people and uh, from this generation kind of coming up, I think like everybody's exposed to so much different music and all these different genres that there isn't like one lane I think most people are kind of in. And I think that is coming out in like a lot of music these days, and how it's kind of an amalgamation of all these different sounds. Is that something you kind of try to do with the music that you produce, is trying to bring all your differing and favorite influences and kind of create its own thing?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. It's like figuring out like I like to listen to this, and this. So in my head, it just makes sense to sort of put all these genres together and make sort of my music style, calling it what I like to listen to at the moment, sort of like having that like I definitely have sort of that indie pop
Hmm.
vibe, but at the
Yeah.
same time, I feel like every song has something else from my influences.
Okay. And kind of going back to like Israel's Got Talent, how was that experience? How that kind of help you and shape you in your music, and like exposure wise, what did it kind of do for you and people kind of getting more knowledge of who you are?
That was what gave me sort of the platform. I think I was very like exposed to social media since I was very young, and I didn't understand it at the time. So I used to post before the show, like covers on Instagram. I used to be very active, but I didn't understand how powerful that platform could be. And once I was on the show, it really created like a really big like boom in the news in Panama, especially
Yeah.
because it was like the Panamanian girl, like in Israel. So it was like, and I saw how my following went from like overnight, sort of from 300 to 30,000. And obviously, when you're 13 or
Yeah.
12, it didn't like it made no difference to me. Like I knew what was going on, but I didn't know how to like what was actually going on. So it was amazing, but and it also allowed, even though it was like a lot of exposure, a lot of also going back to school after that was like, this is so weird because people's like, it's just like, for example, my friends wouldn't, it would be like, oh, who does she think she is? And
Yeah.
no, I didn't say anything. I just got back to school. Like, so there was a big shift in like, I feel like once I realized like more people are looking at what I'm doing, especially in my surroundings. So it was like, okay, this is real. Like people are looking at what I'm doing. And that's why I have to take advantage of it and release my own music and perform and use that platform for good, like
Yeah.
for good stuff.
So do you think like people's kind of perceptions changed or like shifted a little bit over you when you kind of got this newfound, I guess, social media exposure and whatnot?
I feel like for people who know me, like who knew me well before that, it didn't. Like most of my friends tell me sometimes, like even though I'm not like obviously I'm a starting artist in the industry and everything, but for them, like my friends tell me, I talked to you and I forgot you just released an album, and I forget everything because I feel like
Yeah.
there's the performer and then there's Yael, who's just like very like we talk about the weirdest stuff all day. And so for me, it's very important. Like I've never been. That's why sometimes people tell me, "Oh, how does it feel like?" And I'm like, "You don't really feel it. Like you perform and you write your own songs, but if you get too sucked up into the social media world and the follows and the likes, I try not to look at it anymore."
Okay. So did you have to like kind of change any way you go about posting and sharing on social media, or did you have to like become more conscious of that as you started to get this more recognition?
I had to start posting more. It
No,
wasn't
okay.
whenever I wanted to post, but it was just having that sort of consistency and understanding from a very young age, like the power that social media has on people, like how how important it is to post TikToks and reels. And well, that's more new, but still it was like understanding that a post has a lot of power on people. And that's why I had to start being more consistent and understand why I was sort of posting what I was and how that could help my music at the time.
So
And
how
still,
did like you having to juggle social media, you were doing the show, you're still going to school. So like kind of how you managed handling all this at such like a young age?
so the good thing is I've always been very like if I do something, it's kind of 100%. So I am a perfectionist, which is good and bad in this situation because it was like trying to find the balance, and it still is because I'm still haven't finished high school yet. And yeah, I go to school until 4 p.m. and then I do everything. So it is that sort of like finding like I always schedule things at least a week before, having that, okay, this from this time frame to this time, I will study. And here I'll try to post on Instagram and record content. So it is sometimes exhausting, but it's finding the balance with everything and still like having that social time and going out with friends. And so it's finding everything. And I listen a lot to podcasts, and I heard something about something called like the triangle, which is success, sleep, and work or studying. And it was like how you can only choose two at a time. And for me,
Yeah.
it was like sometimes I have weeks where it's more like this week I'm fully focused on music and sleep, and then next week it's more work and school. And so it's sort of finding the balance and knowing when I should be doing more of like what I should be doing for
Mm,
that week. What's my priority for that week?
okay. And kind of like get into like your music. I mean, you started at 8 and so young. Like, do you get those jitters? Did you have like any nervousness being on like this big show and doing all these performing in front of people, or are you kind of like past that point?
I always get nervous before a performance still, but I always say if I'm not nervous, it means something is wrong. So
Okay.
I always have that sort of mentality. Like right now, I just finished 8 shows for Mamma Mia. We had like this production, and it was incredible. And even though I was very prepared and everything, I still got sort of like excited before every show. And when I'm not, I realize that it's sort of you need the adrenaline and you need to feel excited. And nowadays I feel it's less like I'm not nervous, but it's more like that adrenaline that's like, this is why I do it. And as soon as I'm on the stage, like in the show, like 8 years ago, not the show, but when I was 8 years old, I was sort of, I used to get nervous, but as soon as I started singing, I did feel sort of like, hey, I'm doing what I love. So it's pretty like
Yeah.
chill.
So you speak multiple languages. Have you always like been able to speak three, or did you kind of like learn one and then kind of how'd you like how'd you get so fluent in English and all these different languages?
So my parents spoke with me in Hebrew when I was like since I was born. But Panama, it's a Spanish speaking country, and my school is an English speaking school. So that's how
Okay.
I
So,
get
so did you?
I get confused a lot. Like I
Okay, that's
have
exactly what I was gonna ask.
yeah, in my house, we can't complete a single sentence in one language. It got really
So I mean, that's got to be kind of hard when it comes to songwriting, right? Because even though it's still songwriting and maybe it's just different words, there's also like different ways of expressing things and how they like convey those things. So like, do you have problems kind of songwriting sometimes, or like or like conveying what you want to in a certain language, or have you kind of managed a way to figure that out?
I think with songwriting, I don't feel that like I can't say something in a specific language. On the other, like for me, writing was always like even in school, I loved writing, and I feel that's the best way for me to express what I'm thinking and feeling because you can actually think about it before you say it. So it was interesting because after the show, I started writing English and Spanish at the same time. And I did realize like it was very interesting because you realize how different the songwriting styles are for each
Mhm.
language. Like Hebrew is still a challenge for me. Like even when I'm speaking Hebrew, like it's so different. And I've realized that, and I always say, like, oh, it's so annoying how for every language I sort of have an accent. Like even when I speak Spanish and I live here, like there's always some sort of difference.
I mean, when it comes to English, from what I've heard so far, it's like you have like a really good kind of fluent expression. Like I wouldn't tell like, oh, she's from Panama or she speaks all these different languages, you know?
Thank you.
So like I guess when it kind of in terms of like writing versus English and Spanish or singing English versus Spanish, do you find one to be easier or do you find like one to be like more fun? Or, like, are there like any differences that you personally find for yourself?
I personally like writing more in English just because it's it's easier for me to express exactly what I'm thinking. And even with this album, Diary Girl, it's sort of like a compilation of pages from my diary. So all these songs are pretty much very similar to some of these songs are very similar to what I wrote in my diary as to, oh, like sort of journaling, like this happened today and this
Mm,
and all these diary songs, like I wrote them in English in my diary. So
yeah.
the way that I like the the thought behind these songs were in English. So it was just easier for me to write them
Yeah.
exactly how I wrote in my diary.
Okay. Um, I guess well, also when it comes to like Spanish is like I wouldn't say it's like a resurgence per se, but there's certainly like a Latin kind of wave and movement going on in music with artists like Carol G and Bad Bunny and even like Ariana Grande and Rosalia, like you said, like that Spanish speaking, Spanish native music and sound and flair is certainly like kind of at the forefront of music at the moment. And like, is that something that you look to and like kind of want to like tap into as well, or like are you just kind of like proud of like to see where things are?
I like trying new things,
Mm,
and I have released like six or four songs in Spanish already. So I do write in Spanish and I love it. For this specific album, it was in English. But for example, like Bad Bunny is one of my favorite artists.
yeah,
Like I love Bad Bunny and Rosalia are my top five artists.
and he's one of
And
the biggest artists in the world right now.
he is. I saw him his concert. He was insane. And for me, it was like it's so incredible, and it makes me happy that Latin artists and music is like so popular right now, and people
Mm,
are all over the world are listening to Bad Bunny, Rosalia, Carol G. Like it does make me happy, and it's definitely something that I would like to also explore. Like I feel because also I'm so young, there's so many things
yeah.
I could still try.
Are there any current like Panamanian artists that you like look to as peers, or that you kind of look get influences from, or like kind of work with now?
Yeah, so actually there's this new art, well, not new, I love her. She's right now in LA. She's called Sofia Valdez, and she's an inspiration to me because she sings in English. She's from Panama, and she's, I think, the first female artist in Panama that's singing in English and really like making it while singing in English and not necessarily Spanish.
Mm,
So she's definitely someone I look up to. There's also Sitch, who's
okay.
a reggaeton artist, and he's also making it all over and performing in the US as well. I'd say those are my top like two Panamanian artists that I really, really admire. There's many more, but I can't remember now. And I've also, for this album, for Diary Girl, I've been working with Tommy Torres, and he's been also like a mentor for my songwriting. I met him right before the pandemic started, so I used to also send him voice memos of my songs. And during the pandemic, I really took the time to just like write songs. And I think that year I wrote like 40 songs, and it was so all these. I feel like it's so important to have people like who are sort of mentors or people who I find as inspiration, just because there's so much to learn from other people. I always
Mm,
say like you always have to be like you always have to be with people who you can learn something from.
yeah.
So for me it was pretty much that, and I think that's how like surrounding myself with good people who love what they're doing and are like mentors. I feel that was very important for me, and it still is.
So speaking about Diary Girl, just came out. I believe it was like a week ago or something like that. How's the response been so far to the new project?
So it's actually been amazing. I've been like excited for this whole entire week. It got into 4 Spotify editorial playlists. So that
Okay,
was like,
congrats.
thank you. It was very exciting. We all squealed. They're like, yeah. And so it's been very exciting. And honestly, it's also for me, it was like, wow, like 2 years of work and it's finally out and people can already stream it. And for me, it was like such an important part of my life when I started writing these songs. I feel it's an introduction to who I am as an artist and as a person. And I can see like throughout for me, it was very important, like the order of the songs while I released the
Mm,
album and the way it's like it starts in the last song and everything. It just makes so much sense to me, and the way things happen in my life those 2 years. So it does feel like at first it was like, wow, I'm exposing my diary and people and stories and everything, and I try to have the most like storytelling, songwriting to it. And there was one of these songs which I was planning on not even releasing because it was so personal. But I felt like that's the point. Being an artist is being yourself and sort of like letting other people know, and your audience, the listeners, that we have original experiences, but we all go through similar shit.
Yeah.
Like it's pretty much the same thing. So that was it was at first I was nervous, but now I'm just so happy that I released all of these songs and I wasn't like scared to. It was just, this is me and
Yeah.
this is how it is.
Okay. So this is your first album, yes, you've put out, correct?
Yes, it's my first album.
So kind of how was like the process of putting this together, putting together a full album versus like necessarily like just putting out songs and singles here and there? Like, how'd you find that process? What was kind of some of the difficulties that you like experienced like with your first album?
So I started for this album, we released 5 of the songs as singles since June 2022. So I had 5 of these songs out and 3 are new. So, and then we just wrapped them up in the album. But it was different because I was used to releasing like singles and here's a new song, and this was like sitting and understanding, sort of like originally it was going to be an EP, then it extended to an album the last 2 months. And it was sort of like, I think the challenge was patience. Like if there was something I learned, was having a lot of patience and understanding, like it's a process. Like it's not like a single that, oh, I recorded it and it's out. And there's a lot of thought behind like the songs, the concept, the sound, like making sure that it all makes sense, even though it's
Mm.
different stories or and different producers and co-songwriters. And I feel like the waiting 1 year before this, like the songs were ready, but I just had to be patient
Yeah.
before we released them. So I feel that was like the biggest challenge, but also it did teach me a lot, like in my day-to-day life.
Okay. So, I mean, you mentioned track sequencing and kind of the importance of that, which I'm happy to hear because I think like a lot of these newer artists, it's kind of like a lost art in terms of like sequencing and putting together like a sound and a full like project. So what was kind of like the point where you thought like now is the time to put out an album versus, you know, like you said, an EP? Because obviously for musicians, an album is kind of like a snapshot of this is where I am. This is something that you can like point to as a point in somebody's career.
For me, it was like I I was I released singles for 3 years and I was like, I'm ready for an EP. For me, it was like, I'm ready for an EP. I want to go to like that next step for releases. And I was recording more and more songs, and I just had this story in my head and how the things work. And I told my manager, I remember I was like, this isn't like, I have to add these 2, 3 more songs because it makes sense. Like that's how I feel like that was a chapter in my life. And if I didn't release it together and I waited a few more months and for a different album release or EP, it wouldn't make sense. And even though, yes, maybe only I can hear it at the moment, I feel like because it was this one chapter of my life, I felt like that's why it had to become an album. And these songs were sort of like I had to release them so I could start with my next project and my new sort of concept. And that's what I did. I started already working on the next EP. So it's been really cool, to be honest.
Okay. And like you said, your songwriting is very personal. You very vulnerable on here and like you speak from like very personal experiences and whatnot. And like, you know, when I first approached, I'm like 17, like, you know, what could she possibly be like, you know, singing and writing about, you know, like what experiences she has. But upon listening to it, like you really do provide like that personal touch and feel that like you can relate to everything that you're kind of saying. So like, what was your process into like getting to that point? Because it's not an easy thing to do in like songwriting and whatnot, and to like just open yourself up like that.
It was actually when I started the first song that I wrote for this album, which was 90 Days, and it's the focus track. And I remember this song I wrote with Tommy Torres, and I remember we had a session and we just spoke for 4 hours. And I was like, okay. We were in his studio and I was like, it was like, okay, yeah, tell me about your life. Like, and I was like, where should I start? And then we started talking, and I started talking to him about, at the time, like my first relationship and how I was scared, and that I gave it a month trial. And that's how we were
You
like,
do a mock trials, huh?
yeah, that's how we went, oh, 90 days, or you get like the 90-day trial. And
Yeah.
that's how we sort of like, I was so used to writing so metaphorically, like trying not to reveal too much. Like I was scared. And Tommy pushed me in that session to be as like no, almost no metaphors, and be so like honest with everything. Like, so I remember like every time I said something, I was like, no, let's scratch that out and make it even more personal and more like what's happening, like exactly, and how like the conversations. And then like that was April 2021. We wrote and recorded that song, and then summer 2021, which was, oh yeah, it was a few months after, I wrote Summer Fling, which was like the most specific diary song I've ever written in my life, like with specific places, names, and everything. So it was definitely like, at first I was like, how like, why am I doing this? This is so scary. And then I was like, it's actually fun. Like I saw a Taylor Swift interview, and someone asked her like, why would guys date you if they know that you're gonna write songs about them? And she was like, well, so they won't do like, they better learn, like they better learn from what they're doing. So it was like sort of, there's nothing wrong in being so personal. I think that's why people connect to these artists, because they're honest with their audience and they're honest with how they're feeling. And it was sort of also like an emotional discovery. Like for me, it was always hard to show vulnerability, and the only moments where I would be when I was writing songs. So that was, I think that's how I discovered that that's what I'm supposed to do, sort of.
Okay. Yeah, I was gonna bring up Taylor Swift because obviously she has very personal songwriting, especially with like when it comes to like her relationships and it's created a lot of conversation about her personal life as well. So like I also wonder like so personal, so direct, like did you get any messages like I heard your album, like from past, experiences and relationships and people in your life?
I actually did. Like I remember one of them said like, hey, like this song is about me, right? And I was like, yeah, it was a while ago. So it's been funny. Or moms also. So it's because we live like in a town and everyone knows everything.
Yeah.
So it was also very funny to me because people knew exactly what I was talking about. Um, and so yeah, that was, it was very funny, to be honest.
Okay. So you getting the rumor mill in your city, your town going with the album. So I thought it was cool. So kind of what are like some of your favorite songs off of the project, and like what's something that you like gravitate towards the most?
I really love 90 Days, um, because it's like, it's the first song that we wrote and it means a lot to me. And I feel like, I don't know, I feel like it's relatable to everyone. And reading, like, as soon as I posted 90 Days and Tommy posted it, it was like seeing everyone's comments to it, like, oh, I regret not dating my best friend at the time, or I wish I could go back and after 90 days go back to the friendship, and understanding how like so many people feel that way. It was like a song that I really connect to. And I really love Hostage. I feel like it's a very different vibe. It's the intro to the album, and it's more electronic, more dark. I feel like that's the most metaphoric song for the whole album. And we've all been sort of hostages of some sort of situation or reality, not necessarily with people, but also in our, I don't know, maybe in a toxic situation at home or at work. And I feel like Hostage is a very powerful and dark song at the same time. So I really love that one. And I also, for Hostage, I wrote it alone in the piano. And when I went to Shai, the producer, I was like, hey Shai, let's change this and make it instead of a piano thing, like go more electronic, go dark. And it was the first track that we like co-produced. So that was also like a different experience. I feel like every song has like, it's at some point, every song was my favorite song, but for now, I think it's 90 Days and Hostage.
Okay. Yeah, I like 90 Days a lot. I think FOMO also stood out to me because it's like very folky and like very different than everything else you're doing. I was like, okay, I like this little change up and switch up you have going on here.
Yeah, FOMO was very fun. And I don't know if you got to watch the music video, but I decided because it was fear of missing out and it was about my friends and everything. That was the second song I released as a single. And we did like for the music video, I called my friends. I was like, there's no more honest way of doing it than with my friends. So it was very like the whole process for FOMO was very interesting because it was like actually having that feeling of, oh, like when I go and travel to like for recordings or summers and like my friends are
Yeah.
at the beach together. And so it was very also like impacting for me to write that song and the whole process for it. So I'm happy you like it. And it's also like folkish and I love listening to folk, to be honest.
Okay. So album out. Any other plans like future, like for the rollout, shows, tours, possibly like anything planned?
So we're planning a concert in May here for the Diary Girl launch. And so right now we're like planning that and having like this very cool concept. And I'm also working on the next EP. I worked for in London in January with Sasha Skarbek, and that was
Okay.
an incredible experience. He did songs with Lana Del Rey, Adele, and those are one of like my top artists. So it was an incredible experience. The whole sort of, I don't want to get into it a lot because we're in Diary Girl, but it was also like a self-discovery EP, I feel.
Okay. So you also mentioned that you like dancing, uh doing any possible acting because a lot of these comparisons and artists that you like, they're also like kind of triple threats. Like, is that something that you find yourself possibly going to in the future?
Yes, I've been acting since I was 10, so I love the acting and the dancing and musicals. I'm not a theater kid, but I do a lot of musicals. I don't know if that makes sense, but I just finished also the Mamma Mia production. I got to
Okay.
play Donna, and it was really fun dancing, acting, singing. I also did the Addams Family. I got to play Wednesday, and so I really love the whole acting thing and the dancing. And I was also like, I feel like my next goals would be at some point film. I did take a few like film acting courses. And I definitely love to do that.
All right. So I mean, you're really the triple threat, like I was mentioning, and 17, such a young age, is impressive to see like what you're able to accomplish so far, and like you have so much time and years ahead of you. Like, what are your goals, post graduation?
College. I want
Okay.
to study. And I'm a big nerd. I'm not gonna lie. Like for me, like I knew I've always like I'm a very like dedicated for music and acting, but also school. Like I feel it goes sort of for me, it was yes, there's some points where music is my priority more than school, but I've never sort of like ditched that. I've always loved reading and everything. So I definitely want to go to college and study in New York, actually.
Okay.
So hopefully I'll be there in next year.
You don't think there might be some point where like musically you get to a point where it's like, okay, you have to make a choice, school or just full-time musician?
Well, I'm guessing that that's the dream, like
Uh-huh.
reaching that point where it's like, oh wow, you're so successful that you can tour and like do college later. But obviously, like for now, it is college and it is studying. And if something like goes very right, then I would love to tour and perform.
Okay. And what would you study?
What?
What would you study?
I would love to study production and sound engineering
Okay.
and something in business, like have that double major that quite contrasting from like the music, like strategic management.
All right. I mean, that'd be very smart for a musician to kind of learn that side of things too. So you're definitely thinking ahead. You're definitely thinking ahead. I think you have like a bright future. And Diary Girl, I think, is a very good, very great project, especially for somebody at 17 and to put it out. And, you know, thanks for joining us. And, you know, everybody watching, go stream Diary Girl.
Yes, go stream Diary Girl. Thank you so much for the interview.
Yeah, no problem. And, you know, maybe we'll check again later on down the line with other stuff you have.
Definitely. Thank you so much for the support.